Hello, and welcome back to Scratch That Itch, where curiosity makes us tick. We are here back again to start some more meaningful conversation, and this is a very special series. This series, we're talking to guests from Rise World Summit, a summit that enables and empowers partners, entrepreneurs, and citizens for a better tomorrow. Today, we have with us a change maker who brings young leaders together across the globe to create sustainable social solutions. Hi, Philip. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Ankita. Pleasure to be here.
First of all, thank you for making this time and having this conversation with us, which is very important and meaningful for us. Before we actually start today's conversation, which is driving change through students and organizations, we would love for our guests to hear about you and what you're up to lately.
Perfect. Yeah. So I suppose as a very brief introduction, yes, I'm Philip. My day job is an analyst at the consulting firm Elixirr, which are based in London as well. So I've been there with the team for about 9 months now. But outside of that, I am the director of partnerships and network for CSRN, which was originally the COVID Student Response Network as well, and I've been engaged in that organisation for about 2.5 years now, um, as well. But I'm sure we'll get into that. And I'm also part of the One Young World delegation as well. So yeah, plenty of non-profit experience.
That's a lot of change that we're driving clearly. And interestingly, I think a lot of it is to do with young leaders, correct? Most of these organizations.
Exactly. So CSRN was founded by the team while they were all at university as well, and to this day we're entirely kind of student and graduate kind of run voluntarily. And then the One Young World delegation is around getting One Young World leaders who are all kind of people below 30, so youth, together annually to kind of learn from each other and share wisdom and knowledge and elevate their impact through that network as well. So yes, two very kind of youth led networks.
Now, the first question we ask any of our guests is, what is your idea of change?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. There's so many waffly answers I could probably give. But I mean change for me is just continuous evolution. It's a necessity at this point. Everyone has to keep changing and keep moving. The world we're living in is constantly changing. Technology is constantly changing, and we all have to kind of keep up with that as well while preserving what works.
The saying change is constant does stand true, as stereotypical as it may be. I think now let's straight dive into CSRN, which you've already introduced to us. We'd love to understand, how did that even come to be? Because it's a COVID student response. So, what triggered that? What were some things that you saw and why students?
Yes, so CSRM was set up by the team. It was Jack Elliott, Amy Ireland, and Lee Darcy, and they were all in Bristol University together, all doing student consulting, like many of us were, especially during the pandemic. But they noticed the opportunity where a lot of organisations struggled to react to COVID, especially within Bristol, but across the wider UK, and how they would do any of their services or their social impact virtually as well. When we were in, this was kind of during the first lockdown where you couldn't leave your house, apart from that one grocery trip that you were allowed per person, as well, and you couldn't walk further than 500 meters from your house, as well. So how do you deliver impact in a time like that? And the idea was that we could bring very tech-enabled students together, students that kind of were focused on innovation and new ideas, together with these organizations to help them, turn their services to virtual and online and kind of continue that impact and work, look at new options and new services as well that they hadn't previously considered. How can they make the most use of technology as well? And so, yeah, they kind of coined the term the COVID crisis as well, and that's kind of where CSRN stemmed from. And yeah, the first round was very much around COVID. We focused with UK universities for UK charities, and so it quickly expanded out across the UK. Um, we realised this worked really well virtually. The teams did not have to be in the same region as the charity, but they could still deliver impact virtually and work really collaboratively with these organisations. And so that kind of inspired CSRN to go global. So shortly after that was the Beirut blast in Lebanon, and we realised that we knew a university that had a student consultancy on the ground in America University, Beirut. We could get a team of students on the ground to go out and speak to these charities in their native language and convince them of our services, because it was definitely a challenge at the start convincing charities that students can actually come in and help them, especially virtually and not as kind of on the ground volunteers as well. And that's where I kind of got involved in CSRN. I was in the Irish Student Consulting Group at the time. I did a CSRN project for a Lebanese wildlife society on kind of recovering wildlife in the wake of the disaster and setting up a rehabilitation centre. Yeah, we've reached the 500 project mark since we've been accepted. So we've worked with 500 charities in the what's coming up to 3 years, which is a bit crazy to think about in actual numbers. And we've worked with about 60 universities around the globe. But yeah, I mean, we've absolutely loved it.
I have so many thoughts and questions around it, but I love the fact that, the biggest insight, which was you going back to your project that you'd done and understanding, it stood out to you, and hence you thought students were the best place to start. So I wanted to ask what student response was like, because again, I'm sure there was a lot of energy around it as well. And what was that like? Was there any resistance? Because again, it's such a sensitive topic, and or were they more open and receptive and excited about the idea of change?
I think we're definitely more open and receptive because we wanted the CSRN to kind of focus on how we respond to crises, not in the immediate wake, but in the kind of recovery and redevelopment and the implementation of aid as well. So we had student consultants, which is already a very proactive kind of student community who want to gain experience, who often do work with other charities to kind of elevate their social impact and display their work. So bringing them crisis projects, it was here is a global event that we're all very aware of that really needs as much support as it can get. Here's your opportunity to help. A lot of them jumped at that, and I think that's why we saw so many universities kind of come on board, especially when we got kind of globalized. And
Lovely. And here I also wanted to understand, is this more crisis driven in terms of where you send out, programs that are available to students and students sign up? Or, is there a model where you are able to match students as well based on what drives them or if they have a particular cause they want to work for?
so we're getting all our material together. Our network are now aware that we're kind of working towards some Turkey Syria based projects in response to the earthquake and the ongoing crisis there. So there's now an awareness in the network that this is what we're going to focus on. We typically run 3 cycles per year, and each cycle has 50 projects. So the branch kind of know the number to expect. The branches know the number to expect as well. The way it works is we outreach to the charity. We have a scoping call with them where we design what this project's going to look like. What are the challenges and issues they're currently facing? What are the opportunities and ambitions that they have for the organisation in this recovery as well? And where do they want to get to with, say, this massive influx of funding that they've just received as well? Do they want to set up a new service or anything like that? We design that into a project brief, which we upload to. We've designed a platform in which we can allocate these projects out to our like global student network. So each university will have someone that will bid on the projects, will evaluate that, and then assign it to the most suitable team. And then we set up and kick off the project with the team and kind of hand it off to them to run the delivery of the project. And the CSRN lead will kind of have their touch points with the team.
We've spoken of, CSRN involving with students, students getting involved with organizations. But for that, you have to find the right organization. So I wanted to dive a little deeper into that aspect. How do you find the right organizations? What are some lenses that you're looking from to identify that?
Yeah, so I suppose being crisis response always give us almost like a region or a certain event that we could focus our efforts on, and we could look into the wider market of who was helping in this recovery as well. So as I mentioned, having students on the ground we found was really effective for finding more grassroots organisations actually than anything else. Because I could look up the Turkey Syria response now, and it's just going to be Red Cross, it's going to be UNICEF, it's going to be the large organisations who, while they do great work, we're not as interested in helping. We want to work with the grassroots organisations on the ground who really felt and the impacts of the events, and who are more, we'd say, motivated to kind of work on that recovery, and it's a lot more personal to them.
We've been talking about, organization. I wanted to again take a broader view here and touch upon again one of your expertise, which is organization transformation. Now, when we talk about impact, clearly, we've established it's a multiple stakeholder situation where you need synergy between all of them driving towards the same vision. So, if I were to ask you what the role of an organization is when driving change, what would that be?
Organizational structure itself is, I think, crucial to achieving any strategy or goal. It's the actual work behind behind the kind of the mask of a company as well. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important when it comes to change of, how is that organizational structure set up? How does it need to evolve and refine? I don't think anyone ever really gets it's a rare instance where anyone ever gets it perfect. And if it is perfect, it doesn't stay perfect for long as well, which is obviously why change is so important of how can we bring in new technology, new people, new processes.
What's really interesting to me is that we're using structure and evolution in the same dynamics, which is quite opposite. So I want to understand, how do you realize? Because when you're setting structures, you're actually putting guidelines in place, and evolving is constantly changing. So how do you find that balance? What do you create a structure for, and what aspect of it, do we evolve?
Yeah, it is interesting because yeah, they would be very different, but they're equally as important, I think, for any good organization. So you almost need that structure to know how you're going to deliver something. You have to have a structure to set up a process against it as well. So how you're actually going to get, from A to B requires structure and requires people, with different skill sets and capabilities at each level and different levels of seniority as well to make sure that what you actually deliver is, of a sound quality and, meets the needs of the consumer. Non-profits and social impact organizations, you equally can't, ignore evolution because the circumstances you're working in are constantly changing as well. With the earthquake and things like that, that requires a lot of change in the organization of how do you respond to that because it happened overnight as well. And then you have to look at how, you can future proof against these kind of things as well. Are these events going to be more common? What can we put in place that, yes, may not, you know, we're not going to stop it from happening again, but when it does happen again, how can we be the most prepared? And that's also, part of evolution is, putting those mitigation plans.
Yeah, and I think that again straight leads me to the next bit, which is you mentioned so many things that are constantly happening. So you are choosing to respond to it in one way or the other. But what if somebody does not, or what if an organization does not evolve per se and remains to stick to the structure that they have? What is a scenario like that look like?
I can speak on this more from, I suppose, quite a commercial view in that you're going to lose consumers and customers of your products, and you're going to lose a lot of that market security you had as well. I think new technology is coming to the forefront of markets every day. It's changing the customer experience. A lot of the times, it's keeping operational costs and prices down at a time, when the cost of living is so poignant as well. So if you ignore that and you choose not to respond to that, your operational costs are going to go up. Your consumer experience will probably go down. They'll look at alternatives and move away from your brand, and ultimately, then your business is losing its margins as well. So I think, yeah, choosing not to respond is almost a death sentence for most organizations. You just completely lose your competitive advantage as well. And if you do that and something, goes completely amiss, you're going to have to do a reactive approach to it, which oftentimes will not be very well thought through. Will not have like a long-term goal. Will probably not align very well with an organization's strategy, and be quite expensive to run and implement, and not be a very effective solution.
Can you get transformation wrong?
So transformation, yeah, it's an interesting one because ultimately transformation is its own sector in the business. You can't suddenly move everyone into transformation and stop delivering services to the market because you're not going to have any funds for quite a while that then actually, that fund the transformation as well. So it's very easy for transformation to get segmented from the rest of the business as well and become its own entity as well, and operates, and you start to lose touch with why are we building these new services, products, or like technologies. Who is the actual end user of this, and is it going to actually benefit them, and all those kind of considerations. Is this going to be what the customer actually wants as well? And yeah, if we get all of this ready, is it actually going to be adopted and used by whether it's internal business people for their jobs or by the customer? Is it actually going to be used? So it's very easy to lose sight of that because you get lost in the complexity of transformation. And once you're, well into your transformation project, it's very hard to kind of just suddenly turn back on what you're working on.
What does, or even in terms of employee engagement or just people from an organization, what is the role in driving change through an organization? And are these two different, first of all, when we talk about organization and people of the organization? How are these two different?
Yeah, I think people and change is incredibly important. I've learned this. It's all about having the right people in the room as well. So from an, on the ground and in the transformation team, it's about getting the right perspectives in. So that is, you know, can start with the business. What is the business requirement behind this? And having business people involved in your transformation program that can kind of define that and what the use case is going to be. The complexity of the roles just build and build and build. And I've seen it. I've seen, I think, every role under the sun on the current project I'm on, and it's great because everyone has their part to play. But what I've realized is you need to be critically clear about what that person's role and responsibility is, because I've seen it where it isn't, and people get lost in the role and are just kind of trying to plug in where they can and not being as effective as they could be as well. So I think that's on the responsibility of the leadership in the organization to kind of set and define those.
Again, I think another question that I have here is, again, you mentioned that, most of it is managing multiple people, keeping them aligned to something similar, which means there are going to be a lot of scenarios where not everybody is aligned to something, or where you have to make certain demands or certain expectations, or you can't fulfill certain expectations. So how do you expect a leader to navigate a situation like that?
When you're working between multiple business areas, this can happen. I think this is where communication and transparency become key, and I've saw some really great examples of how some of the leaders have done consistent transparency, and it's worked out really well for our team because we're really aligned on like a global and a local level now, and with other business areas. So I think transparency is key, and honesty. I think trying not to let like office politics or things like that play into transformation.
That brings us to majorly our last question for the topic, which is, all of the organizational transformation we're doing is for positive impact. And one of the most common frameworks that we follow is the ESG framework. So could you tell us a little about what that framework is and what influence does it really hold?
ESG, it's almost been kind of branded the buzzword of the day. At this point. And yeah, I think it's one of the next big influences in transformation. So environmental, social, and governance. Environmental is obviously around how we impact the planet that we live on through the delivery of any service or good. The social is how we are diverse and inclusive as well. And then the kind of governance piece is on reporting and transparency to kind of the stakeholders and those who and the communities around the business as well. So yeah, and there are three very important areas, and I think three that can have a lot of tangible impact for organizations as well. I think because it's been one of the big buzzwords of the day, I think it's caused definitely a lot of challenges. I think we've probably seen news articles where like ESG funds and things like that have maybe not been as honest about that narrative as possible. So I think in the environmental section, we've seen organizations set like 2030, 2050 goals, but there's no action behind it to make it tangible. We've seen organizations just go in and set diversity headcount targets when that's not a very effective means of actual diversity and inclusion, and cultural inclusion as well. And then we've seen, a lot of qualitative reporting on kind of like these topics come out to shareholders, but they don't actually make any tangible impact. They're just a lot of nice buzzwords as well. So it's definitely had its challenges kind of getting off the ground. I think ESG, but ultimately it's starting to influence policies and government regulations, and it's what consumers are wanting consumer choices moving to more environmentally conscious ones and more socially conscious. People want to see inclusive employment as well, and these opportunities open up. People want to see exactly more diverse workspaces. I think shareholders want greater transparency, and they want to see that the business is future proofing.
I wanted to bring up certain points. And now, let's say if an organization does want to do it genuinely. So, one thing we've clearly established is start thinking about it from a consumer level as well and the experience they're getting. What are some other practices that they could adhere to, or just start on a small level to include or to be more inclusive of ESG?
I think, yeah, the customer centricity is a a really important one because it's always thinking about that end point and who's going to gain the most value from any changes you make internally as well. So yeah, but it's more around how you then actually achieve that. It's that process and that organizational structure behind it. How can you put more environmental practices in? So whether I don't know whether that's better habits in the office is like one small way of starting into that better. I don't know, like plants obviously and like more and LED lighting and things. There's like so many very small changes you can make as well, but it's also then looking into things like sustainable financing. Green supply chains are a massive one, especially if you're in any sort of manufacturing as well. It's looking, how can you put more green practices into like your IT and things like that. I don't think people realize with like IT and storage the amount of like emissions this creates from storage warehouses as well. So it's taking those, initial steps to become a greener organization. And then it's also thinking, about physical, it's also thinking about the risk of if you don't act on sustainability and the climate crisis, how is this going to impact your business and how can you offset that?
Yeah, I think definitely more integration is required for us to be able to enable this change. That actually brings us to the end of this conversation. So I'd want to thank you for joining us and having such an insightful conversation with us.
No problem. It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
It was lovely to dive deeper into, all the conversations, including youth-led initiatives and how we can leverage the youngsters in our country to drive change, as well as how important it is for organizations to start evolving and adapting to what is happening around them. On that note, we'll see you again with yet another episode and starting yet another meaningful conversation. Meanwhile, why don't you like, share, subscribe, and spread the word? See you soon.